So I am so excited to speak to Nichlolas today. He is a senior leadership consultant. He teaches at two of the major business schools, ex-theatre director, general, amazing human. And he's written this incredible book, Leader as Healer. And I saw him speak and I was like, wow, I really want to connect with you and hear more. And I'm sure he'll explain more in greater detail, but about how as business owners and creating a culture within a business where you recognize that your people and treating them as whole people and looking at the organization as an opportunity to bring out the best in people cannot just be about them being their professional best. It's about their all-round selves being as fully expressed, fully nurtured, fully healed and seen. And I was like, wow, this is a new way of thinking about leadership where it's just really about productivity, or this is beyond well-being and giving people, flexible working hours. This is a completely new way of thinking about this. So Nichlolas, so welcome, and I'm so grateful to have some time with you today.
Thank you, Tom. And likewise, when we met and you said a few things about your work, I also thought, wow. So I'm delighted to be here with you.
So I guess I'm curious how long ago the seed for this book formed and how this has been going, because it's one thing for you to have this idea, but it's a very different thing for businesses to adopt it. So tell me about the seed form of the book and how is it being received, this way of working?
So prior to the book, my work was really focused around what I call presence, but in the deep sense, not kind of stupid charisma, and presence as in I'm really here. I'm really here. And that, that already went pretty deep, relatively speaking. And then probably about 3 years ago, you know how it is for we creatives, an idea comes in. It's like literally, boop, 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 boop. And these words, leader as healer. And I was like, oh, okay. I think I need to listen to this. And fairly early on, I mentioned it to a couple of CEO clients, curious, would they just dismiss it? And they were like, yes, absolutely. So, it started to work on me. And then, it really kind of I talked about it with people. And then one of my biggest supporters, a man called Michael Watkins, who wrote The First 90 Days, it's a huge business bestseller. He said, Nichlolas, you need to write a book. And I'm not a natural writer. It's tedious for me to write, actually. It's not easy, I mean. So I started. And it was a long process, on and off, 2.5 years. And finally, I got there with the help of actually an American editor. I wrote the whole thing and then sent her chapters, and she polished it. And I found a great publisher, and they've done a beautiful job, I think, with the photos, which I chose. And to be honest, Tom, the reception has been beyond what I could have hoped for. I mean, it was published March 4th, which is near 3 months ago in the UK. It sold nearly 3,000 copies already.
Wow.
It's going to be published in the US next 28th of June. But the comments overall, I mean, LinkedIn, of course, and many people who've read it, all clients where I work get a copy. So it's definitely out there. I think I know I could not possibly have predicted these times that we live in and how relevant such a title is. I mean, 5 years ago, Leader as Healer would have been a very strange idea. I think the title itself has a kind of automatic resonance with people now. And then you have the endorsements. I mean, it's got a really good endorsement. So all in all, it's been very well received. And I'm running Leader as Healer program with one of the world's biggest law firms at the moment. And I'm taking 2 of their top teams through a long process. We've done 2 retreats. They've had one-to-one coaching. We're planning a 3rd retreat. And now we're looking at how it might spread through the whole firm. bearing in mind that they tell me they are, they are exceptionally open to this, and many of the people they know wouldn't be. But we'll see. See. I teach at Said Business School. I'm running Leader as Healer there tomorrow for 2 days for their most senior program. This will be 40 people from all around the world. And we'll do a deep dive for 2 days. And then I have the IMD. So yeah, I feel stronger and clearer and deeper in the work than ever before. And what I think I most love is that it's teaching me all the time. I'm amazed at what I go through while working. It gets more and more subtle, more and more embodied. I mean, the core of the work I see more and more is deep embodiment. And that for me has been a theme for 40 years or more, when I really woke up pretty young to the power of embodiment through some very extreme theater experiences in Poland, wild, crazy experiences, which really opened something, and where I understood that if we are talking about change, if we're talking about transformation, it has to go deep in the body. And that's really, in many ways, that's one of the biggest topics I bring to senior leaders. And it's quite radical. It's like, basically my message is, your thinking mind is far too dominant. And your thinking mind does not experience the world. So you are basically living in a way that is pretty divorced from actually experiencing yourself and the world. And we need to correct that so that your thinking mind becomes an incredible part of who you are. But you are located in a much deeper place in yourself, and a much more embodied place, because we experience the world through our body, And I think our culture has totally forgotten that. We've normalized this fragmented, disconnected way of being. So Leader as Healer is my offering of correction for that.
So you get the leaders with, embodied
Yeah.
the value of that, seeing the beauty and the value of that. And if they simply lead from that place, they will naturally be creating experiences, environments, cultures, capabilities from an embodied place. And if we have that, we have a natural wisdom, we have a natural sense of well-being, we have a natural sense of the interdependence and the true nature of how reality works. So therefore, we're not going to drive things beyond balance. There's going to be a balance to our choices that will be more sustainable, be more environmentally sound, and consider our employees like essential working parts of an ecosystem that we cherish first.
Right. Very beautifully put. Yeah. I mean, the whole relational field massively changes. The man who booked the Leader as Healer, who came on my 9-month men's program, so he was already a kind of fan of our work, my work. So he told me after the first retreat we did, his top team, all of whom were on the retreat, he'd actually stopped having meetings with them several months early because he said they were a waste of time. He said, let's do everything by email. Our meetings are not good. He wrote me that after the retreat, he did have a meeting with them for the first time in many months. And he said it was extraordinary. He said the way they showed up, the connection between them, the energy they were showing up with. So it was really good for me to hear this works. It's not just, we'd had an incredible experience in a stunning location in Puglia, South Italy. But that's not enough, it has to work. The one thing I want to say as well, because it's such a big part of the work, is that we do a lot of shadow work. What I mean by that is, because when we start to get embodied, we can work on that, not exactly technically, but there are a lot of processes I do that help people connect with the body. However, somewhere along the way, we're going to meet emotions that we've blocked off, that we had to block off. So my way of working is there is no negative emotion. We need to make unconditional feeling space.
Mm.
I so against all this work about transforming our feelings, managing our feelings. No, the only thing our feelings need, according to me, is to be felt.
Agreed.
But we have to make a safe space for that. And it's a radical change, Tom. Stop thinking about your feelings. Stop analyzing them. You feel anxious? Let's just, in inverted commas, because that just is a huge jump.
It's a big piece.
Let's just feel together. And the release people go through. But stop thinking about your feelings. Stop interpreting them. Stop explaining them to me. I feel anxious because I don't want to because. Let's just feel. That's transformational.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. I mean, my specialism is helping people overcome self-sabotage, imposter syndrome.
Right.
It all comes from those shadows.
Right.
And for me, you know, the key piece is being able to speak to the decision maker in the unconscious mind, what I call the protector. Turns up in sabotage clothing, who has basically made a decision as to what you can handle.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it needs an awful lot of reassurance that you are ready to know the truth.
Right.
And the only way that's possible is if you're willing to unconditionally hold space for all and any eventuality, which is uncommonly profound disappointment in the degree to which we were let down when we were younger.
Yes,
And
exactly.
to be able to finally feel that in our body without any justifications, without any spiritual bypassing and faux forgiveness and rushing to understand the context of our parents' childhood. None of that. That comes later. That comes
Yeah.
later.
Yes.
To just feel the raw horror of the pain of our disappointment, our sadness, our anger, our rage, and to honor it by just giving it space to be felt and not feeling it to get rid of it, which is another thing people do, right? Right? To really welcome it, really give it its time by the fire and roast it through and then listen, because then it will say, this happened and you weren't there for me. And I know you were little, but can you guarantee you'll be there for me now? And so for me, there's this beautiful intersection of feeling our feelings and then remembering who we really are and what we really want and what we'll no longer put up with. And it's like, that's when we actually have the courage to begin bit by bit to truly turn up as we are, right? So yes, totally agree. Do you pre-warn your delegates about what they're in for before they come, or do you trust that? Good.
Because I've heard so often, if I'd known what we were going to do, I wouldn't have come, and I'm so glad I did.
You're like, no. I think to almost any experience, if it's pre-famed with what's going to happen, people bring a whole bunch of stuff to it anyway.
I tell my coaching clients, you know, if we meet and they want to, I say, look, we're going to go deep. Don't sign up unless you want to do that. And they say, no, I want to. I say, go away and think about it. And then write me in a week's time. You sure you want to work with me? Because I'm in the happy position where I don't need clients.
I think one of my favorite prefaces in a book, my absolute favorite, was Chogyam Trungpa. And it's his brilliant book, Cutting Through Spiritual Material.
Right.
And in his preface, he's like, turn back. If your spirituality is going to make your life easier, put this book down, stop, turn around. He's like, this book is going to help you realize you have transplanted your basic egotistical materialistic desires, and you have now applied it to your spirituality.
Exactly.
Wanting to touch the toes in yoga, to find the perfect teacher, to find some transcendent state where you will be beyond the human frailties. Like, forget it.
Exactly.
This is a rabbit hole from which people will no longer understand you. They won't understand your choices. They won't understand why you're living the way that you're living. You're going to lose friends. You're going to go on a very difficult journey, which is going to be incredibly painful. Please turn back. Please don't see your spirituality as an easier life, because it isn't. I was like, wow. Of course, I just wanted to read the book more.
And that, you know, that, by the way, you said something earlier. I don't know if it was but when we were chatting before, but you said this is not just about well-being. You know, when I first was in dialogue with my publisher, they didn't get it at first. They said, okay, we'll put this in corporate well-being. And I was like, no, this is far more than that. And actually, I feel quite critical of the whole way the corporate world has kind of taken mindfulness and actually dumbed it down. I mean, it's better than nothing. But it's too often used for, I feel really stressed. Oh, let me meditate a bit. I'll feel calmer. No, it has a much, much deeper purpose than that.
Mindfulness is the new beer.
A little bit. I'm going to remember that statement. I like
it's like I'm feeling anxious, therefore I will medicate myself with
it. I know.
I will remain unchanged.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will listen to this mindfulness app, which is designed for me to remain as I am, but just be a little bit more peaceful. And
exactly, you said it perfectly. Yeah.
One thing that the world often, I think, gets wrong is it sees something that helps, and then turns that into a great white hope. And it's like, actually, the fact that it helps a little bit is missing out on the possibility of something. Yes. There's this kind of entropic containment which prevents like larger transformation, and it's like, okay, well, if this alleviates some of our symptoms, let's just double down on that. It's like CBT has been proven to help some people with some mild cases of anxiety, kind of a little bit, therefore let's throw 170 million pounds at training loads of therapists to become CBT facilitators, even though we've got no long-term longitudinal study that says it has any long-term impact. It's like it's and partly driven by the economics of the belief that, well, we can't get to the cause. We can't afford everyone to have 2 years of traditional therapy. I'm like, if you get people understanding the principles and being courageous enough to feel the truth that is in their body right now, without having a beer, without binging Netflix, and if you can truly commune with yourself and use some very simple techniques, and you really are committed to the truth, your body and what's being reflected to you in your current reality is the best PhD course you'll ever do.
Exactly.
All there. And so much transformational thinking around social changes is really affected by these old Freudian models of change, which are overly complex and take an awful long time to have an impact. And it's actually, transformation can occur very differently with embodied cognition and all the things.
Totally. This is what, there's always a point where I can say to people, you have to understand that what we're doing here is energy work. And once we've had enough experience, it's clear what that means. We're working with your core energy structure. Sometimes I say it's like acupuncture, actually. We're looking for where the energy is stuck and we're putting the needle in.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. A friend
of
mine.
I'm amazed by as I work, obviously a lot at the moment. I'm just amazed by how what I experience in my body while working gets more and more subtle, more and more deep. It's fascinating. So, and I even this last week where I was on retreat with the lawyers, and I was, even a part of me aware during it, wow, this frequency in the body as I'm working is fascinating. Such a subtle,
Well, I would say in your case, actually, I mean, that's what I was struck with more than anything. And what you were talking about when you spoke, it was a small room of maybe 40 people. And what you were talking about was fascinating. And the CEO you had in the room that talks about the amazing way they brought their team together after COVID, I was incredibly touching. But I would say it was that the energy you were holding was not subtle. It was very, there was a depth to how you were turning up, which was really, really tangible. And it's this thing that I see in teachers or facilitators that I love, is when they've worked out what they do, and they know it works really, really well. And it's this beautiful, with my clients, I talk about making a very clear order in the kind of restaurant of life. People get that right, but the thing that people often don't get right in terms of having a life that reflects who you really are is people forget to put themselves on the menu. And a really well designed dish that's been balanced over years, it's got all the right flavors, and it just hits this spot, and it's talked about, it's got a nice name, and it's got a good strapline, and it's like you are a particularly delicious dish, right? And you have offered yourself up to be devoured. And there's a certain frequency that comes with someone who's like worked out who they are, what they're here for. They usually absolutely love it. And then finally, all of the things are in alignment, that it's like, and then it just brings that dish to the world, you know. And it's, I could feel that you were holding that vibration of readiness, availability, and deeply congruent certainty that if people ate what you were offering, that their life would be immeasurably improved. And there is, it's an energy I love to be around. So I wanted to, you know, I shouldn't have rushed up. I should have mindfully walked up to you, but really I wanted to rush up and wrap my arms around you and just consume some of your energy. And it's just it's really lovely to see what has happened to get you to that place of, like, you know, clarity. And I'm not surprised people are responding.
And speaking of Chogyam Trungpa, who you mentioned earlier, it actually started for me when I was 16. Okay. In a kind of, I mean, I'm thinking about it a lot recently. You know, I was a London school kid, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, fully signed up.
I love the fact that that's just a London school kid. Standard.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
standard, right?
You know, schoolwork was just an annoying interruption. And one holiday, one of my best friends said, look, my grandmother is a Tibetan Buddhist nun living in a small monastery in Scotland that was started by Chogyam Trungpa, who by then left for America. Right. And I'm going to visit her. Do you want to come? And we went up really as in kind of, wow, that's a bit of a laugh, you know, Tibetan Buddhist monastery. And so we're there, and it's all very exotic, and lamas and hours of chanting and meditating. But one day I was sitting in my room, our room, someone had given me a classic Buddhist text, and I was kind of fairly idly reading it. But, you know, Tom, it was literally like a curtain opened. And I remember I knew what this text was talking about. In a very kind of core way. And honestly, that was a life-changing moment. Because from then on, in one way or another, I knew I had to explore that. And obviously it went through all kinds of byroads and diversions. But that, from that moment, that defined my life, actually.
Isn't it amazing, the things that will grab, you know, that will captivate or capture? For me, that, you know, there's a one man who's walking around the world. He's got no idea the impact on me. He said one throwaway comment to me. I was, I'd gone to visit the Red Fort and the Taj Mahal, and the Red Fort being, you know, the palace where the person who built the Taj Mahal lived, and he could see the Taj Mahal out of his bedroom window, this grand mausoleum for his beloved favorite wife. And I was, you know, this was a historical visit for me. It's nothing, I was not remotely spiritual. I was not remotely interested in things, anything religious, whether it was all nonsense. People fighting over land and territory and the control of the masses. Was, you know, had a very ignorant take, and been brought up by a very passionate atheistic father.
Me too.
And had a very, very dim view of anything spiritual. Um, and then in the Red Fort, there's this beautiful archway, and carved across the archway was all of the major symbols of all the world's religions. And I was like, how does that happen? Like all these religions, my idea was like, people are religious, they've got their one religion and they think it's better than everyone else's, and that's it, right? And I was like, but I knew enough to know that obviously that doesn't make sense. And I just said to this tour guide, I paid him probably £1. He might often have large groups of people. They're just independent people who hang out at the doorway and offer this service, right?
Right.
And I just had my one solo journey. This guy was amazing. And he just went, all religions are just different cultural attempts to understand our existential struggles in life, right? For him, it was just a very normal, very simple statement, but it split my head in two. I was just like, it sounds so obvious now, but at the time it was a paradigm shifting idea. And had he not said that, 2 weeks later, I had a most profound oneness experience. And he's an intrinsic part of that. And since then, I've gone on to help an awful lot of people have similar kinds of experiences. This guy is walking around with no idea of the composite impact that one sentence he said had.
Right. Beautiful. And, there's something else here for me that's very important, because last week, so I was running this retreat, and they'd found this incredible venue, an hour and a half outside Rome, 13th century monastery. St. Thomas of Aquinas lived and died there.
Wow.
Back in 1274. I was able to sit and meditate in the room where he died.
Wow.
So, and the Abbey was just, I went in and sat, just incredible. So I said to the group, you have to understand something. We needed to throw out religion. To throw that out, but you have to understand, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Go and sit in that abbey. Forget about religion. Just sit and experience the frequency that's there. Talking about how we've condemned ourselves to this secular world. And I was saying that in Israel at 5 p.m. roughly every Friday, when Shabbat opens, and it's a specific time, there is an unbelievable change in the energy field. It's kind of like the heavens open, and you can feel it everywhere, and it closes 24 hours later. Now, I've sat at times in a cafe in Tel Aviv at that hour, and for me it's like, wow. And I said to people, can you feel? And they're like, what are you talking about? That's the tragedy of the secular world, because they have such a problem with the religious people there, so they've abandoned that, but they don't feel this remarkable change in energy, because they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Amazing. And yes, I couldn't agree more. After my moment of epiphany, that was kind of the theme of the first book I wrote. It was never published. I did go on to be published later, but it was all about trying to reach out to my younger self and go, you've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. There is a field of divine interconnection, which we're all part of, that we share.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with that dogmatic religiosity of a separate entity controlling things, but rather our relationship to reality being beyond our primal fear, and operating from a place of faith based on the power and beauty of the human heart and unconditional love, and the magic of that. Like this is truly magical. It's like, and the fact that yes, we can choose collectively to have a day dedicated to grace, or for me, it's endlessly fascinating that before a kiss or a meal, or just I can go for a walk, or I can go for a walk holding God's hand. I can choose to taste the divine before I drink water, and then I notice it. It's like, and I realize that rituals and rites of passage are just about just bringing in that choice of remembrance so that we're still tapped in. And I think the idea of consciously bringing that into boardrooms, into management meetings, into recruitment drives,
Right.
just weaving it through the whole.
Yes.
I'm so heartened. I mean, I'm really also curious. I'd love to have another conversation with you. I'd love to have lots of conversations with you, but down the line, just in terms of how let's say you get the whole leadership team like connected, embodied, switched on, beautiful. And then how they're able to, like, what they do, what comes out the back of that, because you can then codify some of the cultural changes. And so when people are building companies,
yes,
you know, I'm always concerned about these cultures trying to change, right? Whereas actually, how can we codify the best practices and build them into the future way of creating business? Because that's going to be easier than turning some of these oil tankers of culture around with you as a very devoted tugboat, you know?
That's really so opposite. Yeah. First of all the people I worked with have teams, so they're already hopefully going to spread this into their teams. But interestingly, with some horror in a way, the next book is already in my mind. I vowed never to write another book, but it's already coming, and it's about that. It's about codifying what is a culture based on these principles, because leader as healer is very much about the individual person becoming leader as healer. But I realize that what's needed now is exactly what you're saying, is how do we codify a culture that embodies that has all the different levels that are in the book, that has that lives from this expanded consciousness, that embraces all the emotions, that is deeply embodied, and that listens. The last chapter in the book is the call, which is about listening. And it's about questions like, what is it that is being asked of me now? Or, at the end of a 2-day program, we start to really address that. Sometimes at Said Business School, we sit all together and we meditate with the question, what is it that is being asked of us now? But the very asking of that question is already in a completely different consciousness, because it's not, what do I want to do? What do I want to create? No, it's, I'm here. What's being asked of me?
What's being called for from
my life as service?
Perfect.
Beautiful. That's new culture. So it's beginning beginning just the first drops of trying to write about what is a completely, just as I said, leader as healer is a new paradigm for 21st century leadership. I want to write now about a new paradigm for 21st century organizational culture.
Yeah. Well, that's leader as healer, organization as evolutionary impulse.
Oh, that's nice.
I see it. I feel for me, one of my favorite things.
Wow, can I borrow that?
Yeah. Organization as evolution, or as evolutionary impulse. You can, if that works for you, by all means.
Wow.
I'd be very proud to have played a small part in the iteration of that. But for me, one of my favorite things when I've worked with people for a little while is, is the power of what I call a kind of transformational circle. If you looked at it, people might think it's a sharing circle, but for me, this is very, very different. Because with sometimes a little bit of facilitation and intervention can be a really powerful part, which isn't appropriate in a sharing circle. But in an evolutionary kind of transformational space, I get people to really get present, and then this open space. And then I give them coaching on, I want you to notice, this is not where you get to say something clever. This is not where you get to say something profound. This is not really about any of those things. Might you say something clever? Might it be profound? Great, that's fine, that can happen. It certainly doesn't need to be. What I'm waiting for is for you to speak when you feel the call. When you feel the call. And I help them recognize, this is the feeling that if at the end of the day you don't speak in this moment, that you will feel something was missed or missing.
Beautiful.
And so what happens is that puts people into a place where they will probably second guess their first
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the second, and then they wait. And for me, in those microcosms, and then people start communicating from that place, then wow, actually that which is most incredibly personal to one person is that which is most universally applicable to the group. And this evolutionary grace
100%.
starts to work through everyone. And I'm like, and
yes.
my favorite thing I like to point out is this is just working because we've paid attention. This is operating all the time.
Exactly.
In every moment, in every choice, it's like, what is being called for? What's the truth, and what would love do? Love for you and love for all. It's if we can ask ourselves these questions, then the soul answers. I think one thing that I find most interesting is when you look back across the ages, and if you read texts from various different spiritual times, a lot of people will talk about we're on the edge of something new, right? And of course, I think that's always true. If we close our eyes and we feel into that, there's this evolutionary impulse that's burgeoning, ever burgeoning, and it's spilling over into the new with this excitement of a flower bed coming into bloom. And if we can just get present and tap into that in an embodied way, as the ways you've been describing, I find the universe is incredibly chatty. And I love that phrase you use. It's like this idea has been working you. Because when we're not, what's being called for is an iteration of something possible.
Yes.
But it calls us to expand in capability to meet that.
Exactly.
There's this nexus, isn't there, between what's being called for and who we're being asked to become in it.
Exactly.
And it's not about being better or personal development, or it's just this natural evolutionary impulse. And the idea of an organization like bringing that into their, not just the board meetings, but into every meeting.
Exactly.
How interesting.
Yes.
My personal kind of feeling for what I'm most interested in spending time working on is, so I now work with fewer clients, work in a much more devoted way where I can really immerse my clients in abundance, in my generosity, set in beautiful settings, and all is just so that I actually have time to do what's really being called for. Working with people who want to make change so that they make more beautiful changes, that fires me up, and I love that. But for me, what's being called for me is an articulation of what an enlightened society looks like. Well, like, what's an enlightened school? What's an enlightened hospital? What is an enlightened workplace? If we understand the principles, like how does spirituality play out in practical forms? If we were a deeply spiritually connected community, what would schools look like? What would hospitals look like? What would mental institutions look like? What would prisons look like? It's like, I think they'd look really different to how it is today. But we're not going to move towards that by complaining about what is. We're going to move towards that by beautifully articulating what's possible. And I think it will be so appealing in principle that we'll naturally gravitate towards it.
I love listening to you.
Well, I love listening.
We have a very deep common ground. I think it's lovely, Tom.
Well, interestingly enough, you mentioned that your father was Jewish, but your mother wasn't. That's also true for me too. So
really?
Yeah. So some common ground.
Yeah.
And it's been just a delight. And I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Get an imprint of this man's wisdom. I'm so excited that your client base are feeling your congruent kind of certainty, and therefore that people are trusting you. And I know amazing things are happening through you and because of you. So I honor you. Thank you for all of the things that you must have done to get to this place. And it was worth it. And the world sees you, and we're going to see more of you, I'm sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Real pleasure.